everybody. This is Brian Mahoney, the CEO of Trender Research and the president of the OTT Executive Community. We're continuing with our OTT Executive podcast. We're joined today by Adam Ware. Adam, please introduce yourself.
I am Adam Ware. I'm the Senior Vice President of Growth Networks and Stuff for Sinclair Broadcasting Group. I started, I know I don't look it, 37 years ago, selling television advertising for local TV stations across the country. And when I was 23, I think, I went to work for the Fox network in affiliate distribution. And at the time when I moved there, the Fox network was on Saturday and Sunday night. I don't know if we expanded to Monday night. I was there for 7 years. By the time I left, we were fully distributed. Exactly what you see the Fox network distributed today is what we distributed to. In fact, I showed this to you before. I'll show it to the viewing audience. Fun little trivia. This is the first ever trade ad for the Fox television network. Back then it was called FBC, because really original back then. And in fact, there's a couple TV stations on here, WBFF in Baltimore, which is Sinclair. And I think Columbus, Ohio is in there somewhere as well. So this is when I got to the Fox network. And
wow, that's a collector's item right there. That's pretty cool.
Yes, it is.
So for our listeners, he's holding up a, how would you describe that? A poster of what? The different stations available on the...
Back when there were magazines, right? We had trade ads. And this is a print ad that has individual TV sets that shows the television station call letters for, I think, 100 TV stations. Mm-hmm. And at the time, these TV stations were all independent TV stations, and the Fox network was the new network for them. I was there when that happened and got to be part of helping TV stations go from being independent TV stations, keeping that independent mindset and alternative and sort of taking on the mainstays in the business and growing their audience and so on, and then ultimately picking up football and on and on and on. Mm-hmm. After that, I then worked again for Mr. Diller at a different company called, ultimately became Interactive Corp. And there I was part of a team that launched a new local television format called CityVision. And it was loosely based on something in Canada called City TV. And it was all about TV stations, again, being in the best position to serve their communities with more local news, et cetera. Also was involved in Home Shopping Network at that time. Went from there, went to the UPN network and helped turn around the UPN network, brought wrestling on, the WWF. Then it was WWF, now it's WWE, mm-hmm. Star Trek, Buffy, et cetera. Ultimately, that combined with the WB to become the CW. And then I was in the business of helping a lot of different companies make the move to streaming. The first I got to work on was with Tennis Channel. And 8 years ago, Tennis Channel was the first cable network to launch a plus service, Tennis Channel Plus, and was the first cable network or television network to have an app that had TV everywhere and subscription in the same app, which today is normal. Right. Back then it was heresy. At that time, Sinclair bought the company, bought Tennis Channel, and I was brought in to then work on the emerging businesses inside Sinclair, streaming businesses, as well as the Growth Networks Group. And in many ways, the Growth Networks Group represents a lot of the things of what Next Gen TV, ATSC 3.0, mm-hmm. Can deliver, which is more television networks with the new spectrum, as well as all sorts of other interactive components and data and so on. So that brings me to here.
So all right, so question is, what are the growth networks and what is your sort of purview there?
Excellent question. Thank you. The growth networks are our portfolio of, some people call them multicast networks. I think that's the technical name. Diginets is another term I've heard of. Mm-hmm. Some people call them emerging television networks. and other people call them television networks. So that's literally what they are. They're television networks. They're distributed through television TV stations and consumed via over the air and however else those TV stations are distributed. They're using, however, the digital spectrum of the TV station. So while this occurred way back when TV stations went from 4:3 to 16:9 screens transmission, it also allowed TV stations to put more signals through, more channels, more capacity. And so you started to see things like channel 4.2, 4.3, 4.4. DigiNets occupy the 0.2, the 0.3, the 0.4 positions. And so we own three of them. Comet, which is a network for sci-fi fans. Charge, which is a network for fans of action and cop shows and all sorts of fun stuff like that. And then a network called TBD, and it's not because we couldn't think of a name. It's because it stands for To Be Discovered, featuring content that you'd find on the internet, shows that are reality-based but comedic and things like that. And so the three of them together make up the Growth Networks group. And they're positioned in the ad community, because these are advertiser-supported networks, as often referred to as the stack, because they're completely complementary. They have different audiences. I think the overlap is like 5% in terms of duplicated audience, and they've been growing steadily since we've launched them. I think this last Sunday, for instance, Comet with the movie called The Village ran in prime time, and beat Sci-Fi Network with the little movie they had called Shrek 2. And so that's the pond we're playing in, so to speak.
So Growth Networks, it sounds like things are growing then?
Yeah. I think they're growing yes, they're growing.
Okay, and why are they growing?
Right. Glad you asked that question. No, so they're growing in two ways. The first way they're growing is that audiences are finding them, right? And that's, I think, in general, what's been occurring, let's just say over the last 5-6 years, as audiences are seeking out new forms of television viewing for all different reasons, and it depends on which audience segment you look at. And they are finding new TV services and new TV channels or new TV networks. And so the audience are moving there. Well, with the audience moving there, advertisers follow. And so we're growing on advertising as well. Last year, this last upfront was our second full upfront we participated in. And one would argue it was a challenging upfront for the business as a whole, right? All of 22 in general was. We were up in revenue year over year for general market advertisers, and brought new advertisers on board that we had never been in business before. All of them looking for the same thing. They're all looking for where the audiences have gone, and so on.
So let's talk about, if you don't mind, viewer acquisition a little bit, because it used to be, and you still benefit from this too. You just described, you'd be flipping through channels and you discover some new content, and that's the way you'd become a fan of a particular show or station or what have you. And there's all these other tools now in the world of streaming and social media. How do you wrap you're growing. So what's working? How do you, sort of affect those different levers of viewer acquisition? Maybe you can share a little bit of your strategy.
In the streaming business, generally it's really about getting someone to download an app to some device. The way you generally do that is you either promote it on your air, go here and download our streaming version of our channel, or if you're new, if you were Pluto or any of these entities, right, you would go buy advertising inside the stores. And you'd buy a lot of advertising. So you'd be buying the downloads to get a lot of sampling. and you'd be dealing with a lot of churn and so on. That is the tried and true way of getting people to sample. Costs a lot of money. The way people sample the multicast networks is quite simple, which is, so here's a Roku device, right? For those who can't see, I'm holding a Roku 4 and a nice long cord coming out of the HDMI device. Here's the Apple TV. Here's a nice little, another smaller version of the Roku stick. There's a Fire around here. Similarly, you can go buy an antenna. This is an antenna. And here's the cord for it. And you plug this in the back of your TV and you scan it. But that's all you have to do. The rest is free. There's no other subscription.
That's the over the air channels.
This is to get over the air television channels, right?
Yeah. So funny story. I put one on. It was like a Mohu Leaf, and we have a TV. We have a pool house in our backyard. And we put one of those antennas in. My kids thought it was the coolest, most high tech thing. I plugged it in. I'm like, look at all these free channels we're getting.
Well, that's the beauty of it. So if you are if you were an older viewer, right, and you left cable, let's just say, all right, you're trying to figure out a way to find ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox, because you can't seem to find it as well as your local news and the sports and all the things that come on there. And you can't find it simply through all these different apps. And they all seem to cost money, which is one of the reasons why you sort of cut the cord in the first place. And during COVID, then a lot of people were stuck with a lot of time on top of it, and they all of a sudden they discovered these antennas. Mohu Leaf is one, the one I showed is another. There's some that go on the roof, there's some that go on the back of your TV, whatever. They plugged them in, and voila, there was the local TV stations for free. Perfect. And then they started to sample around, and they started to discover these other channels that existed, these .2s, .3s, .4s, and that's how they find us. So literally, because these networks, whether it's ours or others that are in the sector, they are immediately adjacent to an ABC, a CBS, an NBC, a Fox, an independent television station that is number one, number two, number three, or four of all TV channels in the market on cable, period, everywhere. Mm-hmm. Regardless of the day part, right? Represent 90% of the audience in the morning, represent, 75% of the audience between 3 and 8. They're there for local news. They're there to watch Family Feud. They're there to watch Ellen earlier, whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And then in prime time, the networks still represent 45% of the audience, mm-hmm. right? Among 4 television networks, or 5, a little bit higher if you count the CW. And then you get to late night, and there's things to watch in late night, but that's dominated by the local news, and then by a Bear show or so on and so on, right? So by being immediately adjacent to them, or in essence fishing where the fish are. Mm-hmm. People sample us. They all of a sudden they're channel surfing. It's a very basic lean back experience.
Been doing it for a long time, right?
This is the basic behavior of television viewing. Now, while television viewing has evolved for sure, right, depending on the genre of content. So if you're going to watch news, right, that's more of a lean in experience. Therefore, you're paying attention more to it. You can then take it with you and watch in different ways, or read, or whatever, or on social, or on a mobile app, or what have you. Same with sports in a different kind of way. But then pretty much every other genre of content is a lean back experience. Mm-hmm. And the couch has remained remarkably the same through all of this change in business. And so when you're in a lean back experience, it is a channel surfing experience, a sampling experience. It's finding shows that you generally have heard of or familiar with, mm-hmm. With brands that you trust. So you put a lot of faith that the brand that's going to tell you a story, you're going to trust them to tell you more stories. You're going to come back to visit them over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. In the streaming space, it's a little bit different. Now, if you're really narrow, like Tennis Channel is, here's for tennis fans, right? Well, now you're putting your trust in tennis and you know what you're going to get, and that's where you live. Netflix has clearly become a brand that people have trusted, right? They know what they're going to get there. Can't always find everything that's there.
Right.
Different issue, but they know what they're going to get there. But all these other services are also going through a very similar thing. They're big, giant aggregators of content. And at the right price point, they seem worth it, right? Well, I'm only paying this per month. I'm going to get a lot of different stuff. Well, these prices are now going up, so if you have a Disney brand, awesome, right? But if you have some other brand, it's very hard for that brand to live up to the brand value that's expected in the space. And that's hard for viewers, particularly as the price is going up. So I think in large part what's happening now, I probably leaped forward to another question, but in large part what's happening now, as people are discovering these services, there's certain things that drive it. Is it easy to watch? Is the price right? Like free is a pretty good price, strangely, it always has remained. And in the time that I have to dedicate to watch television, am I being entertained or informed? Am I engaged? And that's sort of the old rule of TV. So TV business has changed. The relationship between a viewer and television may have evolved and gotten smarter and all these different things, but it's still the same basic relationship.
Right. You want to be entertained, you want to be informed. Can we pursue that a little bit more, the whole content discovery thing? Because you've learned a lot. I mean, you were a pioneer with the Tennis Channel, and you brought a lot of those lessons learned into your Growth Networks role here at Sinclair. And you have the Stir property, the streaming property. Viewers are in different modes. Sometimes they're in that lean back channel surfing. They want to discover. They want to, they don't want to put a lot of thought into it. Sometimes they want a particular title. They want a particular genre of content. How do you help them manage that portfolio of content that you're providing to your viewers? Like, what is that process? Are there any kind of tips you can give us, or how do you sort of manage that process in, getting customers to the specific title that they're looking for instance?
So I think there's a combination of things going on right now. So if you are primarily in the VOD business, and you could say that Netflix is in the VOD business, but really they're kind of in the linear business, because once you get to something, it auto plays to the next thing right after it's over. So it's not just a single file video you're watching and that's it, I'm done. You find yourself all of a sudden watching 8 episodes of something, right? That's a linear lean back experience. It's so lean back that sometimes one falls asleep and finds themselves, at
just like the good old days, right?
Good old days where okay, I guess I get to go back and watch those things again because I forgot what was happening.
But that's the good thing, right? You can do that. Back in the day, you'd miss your spot, you'd fall asleep, and
There's no doubt about it, right? So technology has now allowed, obviously, for people to either record through DVR or be able to go back and find it in some library. In a perfect world, the technology would support the ultimate freedom that would exist with that I type in something or I talk something and pop, there it comes up in a perfect world. But unfortunately, the rights are done in such a way, because this is the reality of paying for TV shows to be made, is that you can say something to a television or type it in and you'll get a result. Sometimes it will be the result you were looking for. They just won't have it. Right. And won't tell you where to go. Or they'll say, well, because you were looking for this, here's some 8 other things you might like. So this is sort of the friction that exists with what the technology has the ability to do and how television distribution and rights and actually the economic system that pays for all of these things to be made distributes it. And I think the ones that do it the best are the ones that have the best algorithms, right? So they know what you watched, and therefore they'll recommend other things. Sometimes that works. Or they have designed their product in a way that it's easy to start hunting for content. You may start with one thing. Well, that really is curation. And that's not necessarily done by a machine. That's done by people sitting there going, here's what we should feature today. This is why we think we should feature it. You know, some movie came out with some star, or some TV show came out with some star. Well, we have a different thing with the same star, so we'll put that up and push it forward. And so you either play into what either is working on your platform already, and therefore you know what viewers are watching, and you'll be able to, depending on how evolved your platform is, be able to feature like content, recommended content to them, and so on. Then there's the other way, which is does not allow people to go hunt and find whatever they want. But hunting and finding whatever you want takes, assuming that it pays off, takes a lot of work. And sometimes you find, you know, all these different services offer different kinds of tools that help it easy for you. So you find yourself favoriting everything. You know, I have, like everybody else, I'm sure, has like 6 different lists across 6 different devices or services. And I forgot what I had favorited, you know, and then I have to go back and start editing my list. It's kind of like going back and deleting emails or something, right? You're like, oh, I got to clean my tasks up here. That takes work. And that taking work is a bit contrary to a lean back experience.
Yeah, it's gotten better though, right? I mean, it's been, I would say 5 years ago, I mean, it's not perfect, but we had a very fragmented experience. I think some of the voice remotes are helping a little bit. We don't quite have the same input problem we had years ago. We had to switch literally to different devices and set-top boxes, depending on what content you wanted, which was a very disruptive, conscious, non-lean back experience. And now you can just say, you know, I want to watch this show, and it'll pop up across your different services. Again, to your point, directed, and you don't know if it's actually what you're looking for or what that particular service has licensed, and they're going to recommend similar titles or what have you. But I'd say before we're probably 2 out of 10, maybe we're a 5 or 6 out of 10 in terms of the discovery process.
I agree. I think it's definitely improved. I think technology has always advances, and they get applied and get refined and so on. I can't think of any single one where someone goes, "Oh yeah, that works perfectly." Yeah. Right. Oh, did you download the update? You know, what speed of internet are you using? You end up with all these different things. I think people are patient and will discover, because it's kind of fun and cool. And it's always fun to discover something that you either remember but you never watched, or you watch and there it is again, and those kind of things are absolutely parts of it. I think that the flip side of that, however, is each one of these services works differently. So how I go search on Netflix is different than how I go search on Hulu. Now, what may be similar is if I'm on an Apple TV, they all have the same search interface, right? And work with the
Comcast or whatever, yeah.
Right. So the platforms themselves, the device makers themselves, have greatly improved the seamlessness of being able to access video. You still go back to the program services. So what Netflix is, or what Hulu is, or what Pluto is, or Peacock, or Prime Video, or HBO Max, now Max, or whatever, these are not the equivalent of Comcast or the equivalent of Cablevision or Altice, or these are brands. These are entertainment brands, and when you have that kind of brand relationship, you have to be able to curate. You have to be able to put things up that fit your brand. Now, there's a lot of growing pains through all this. I think the point I'm making is that ultimately what gets lost in all this change is that it requires people to be programmers, not viewers. It requires the people that run these services to realize that they are in the programming business, they're in the television business, and they're not in the tech business, right? They're not just about making everything available to someone. I think the second thing you have to remember is that if you bring someone in at a low price, you're going to have tons of churn. Because they came in, it's just as easy to leave. The theory is if you price it low enough, they won't remember to cancel it the next month and so on, right? But you can't afford to be at that price point. So everyone's price starts creeping up. Now, if you are selling annual subscriptions, which is what generally you do in the sports business, or season subscriptions generally, right? You mainly are dealing with transactions at a certain time of the year, right? The beginning of a season or around certain tentpole events, right? But if you are in the monthly business of entertainment, now you're dealing with churn upon churn upon churn upon churn. And that's a very difficult business to be in when you have that kind of sampling and people leaving and then coming back and so on. And I think the answer to that everyone has been realizing is raise the price. Well, one of the reasons people have left cable in large part was price, right? So all of a sudden you're creeping back up into one of the pain points that people had. So
I mean, when you put together 3 or 4 of those apps and your local, I mean, you're definitely up there where cable costs.
The theory was always that a la carte costs something, right?
Right.
There should be a premium for a la carte. It should be cheaper. It should be more expensive, right? Because now you're picking and you don't get the benefits of a bundle. The counter to that, though, is you're paying for a lot of things you'll never watch because they're just not for you. They're not meant for you. That's the counter to it. Well, I think that's where services are having problems in the sense that you know what a Netflix show is. If you went and did focus groups, what's a Netflix? And you showed who do you think that belongs to? They know that, and probably the HBO brand similarly, right?
Disney, you know what you're getting
Disney
there in
too.
that package.
Yeah, but for example, I watched a show on Disney Plus the other day that was, it was in the featured row, and it was next to the latest Star Wars series. It was next to the latest Santa Claus movie. It was, it was whatever it was. It was a lot of family and things.
It's kind of
like
a hodgepodge, right?
And then there was a movie in there about the evacuation and war refugees from Afghanistan, because it was from Nat Geo. Now, it was great. I mean, I watched it. It was great. There's nothing about that movie that in any way, shape, or form matched anything else on that row. Right. Or had any relation to a Disney brand. I mean, it was about war, and it was about, people being left behind as they were trying to get out of the country and things like that. It was quite a powerful movie. This is the challenge, right? So, and I think that's what's going on right now. I think the other thing that's going on right now, to your point, is that you have all these different services people are paying. Well, ultimately, you can't have this many services.
Right.
And so I imagine you'll start seeing consolidation amongst a lot of different kinds of services.
Let's talk about that a little bit more, because, we talked about content discovery. We talked about the unique brand that you have for different apps, different channels. There's a reason you have Comet and you have Charge, and they have different, they're curated differently. The programming's different. Where do you see the industry right now? If you take it up a level, Adam, we've got this contraction, plateauing. There's only so many subscribers and viewers to go around. Some people are talking about peak TV or peak streaming. Do you see it that way? And how does that bode for the future? Are we going to see the consolidation you're talking about? Are we going to see prices increase to cover that? Are we going to see cost reduction? We're already seeing some layoffs. If you look in your crystal ball for next year, just the next 12 months, what do you see?
I imagine you'll probably see one major consolidation, right? It just feels like that's what needs to happen. I think you'll see content that was generally exclusive to streaming services start to find its way out to other places. So a syndication model will evolve. So if there was a show, for instance, that ran only on Prime Video and it was exclusive to Prime Video, I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not saying Prime Video, but I wouldn't be surprised if you saw a show find its way out to other places that was similar to normal syndication. You already saw the quasi announcement yesterday, right, about certain shows coming off of HBO Max and going and being sold to, in essence, going into the syndication market.
Right.
In this case, trying to sell to fast channel distributors. And I even think there was part of that story was about how HBO Discovery or Warner Discovery was going to launch their own fast channel, right? So, which now gets the big other thing, which is I do think that viewers have moved. There's still and this is of all ages. Generally speaking, things always sort of start with younger viewers because younger viewers generally will be the first to adopt and sample new things. If something ends up staying around, it's not because younger viewers was what we're driving it. Ultimately, it always has to broaden out. And you see more viewers come and you see all different age groups come, right? And I think what has clearly occurred is that advertisers that may have put a tremendous amount of revenue resources against cable networks, for instance, are moving that money. And they're moving that money in levels that I think surprised a lot of people, independent of whether it's a soft economy or not, right? I think the fact that they moved it in such great numbers, I think woke up people. And where did they move it to? They moved it to two places. They moved it in generally to fast/AVOD, right? And they moved it to multicast. And if you would have said to somebody 2 years ago, what's your fast, or even last year, hey, what's your fast channel strategy? People would go, come again, right? What? Tell me what a fast is.
We'll get back to you on that, right?
Yeah, we have, we're just starting to look in and examine, blah, 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 right? It's like, good luck. And you can't just take sort of library and put it together anymore and call it a channel. You won't get noticed. So that market has evolved very quickly, where it was a place to put content. Now it's a place where these things actually have to be channels and not just playlists of things.
Right. They're not just libraries.
And I think well, if you were to do a classic thing, right? But again, you have to program it. I mean, that's the thing.
You got to string it together, right?
Yeah, and what's quickly become, I mean, there's a lot of people will be very forgiving about a lot of things since they're not paying for it, right? So, but at some point, there's only so much time someone has in a day, and if they sample through and they realize, well, this is just like a 500 channels, there's nothing on, they'll be like, I'm not paying for it, thankfully, but you'll have to rise at some point. And what will end up, and that's already happened. You can see this across pretty much every service that's out there in the fast space, is that you probably get 10 to 15 channels that do extraordinarily well. And those channels do extraordinarily well because they either look like TV networks. Generally in the fast space, they're based on news, right? Or the service themselves features it. So they by default stick it in front of you. It automatically opens, boom, that's an impression. The question is, what happens when you're done featuring it? What happens to that channel afterwards? Now you get to the second group. So if let's just say out of a whole group, maybe 10 to 15%, let's say there's 100 channels, 10% are these amazing channels. well performing, that get driven by that. And then I would probably say 60% are these channels that don't do well. And they benefit simply because of how widely something is distributed. And then there's the rest, which is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
And that's cool for a while, but at some point, those channels in the bottom, the services don't need them anymore, right?
The long tail, does the tail fall off at some point?
Well, it's already started to happen, right? So like you've seen it in the news space. You've seen it in local news, for instance. Many TV stations, including Sinclair, have launched streaming services and fast channels around their local news. In the case of Sinclair, we've done it on News On, and we've done it on Stir. Stir has been more of a warm-up for next-gen TV than it is necessarily a business that needs to work today. It's more about let's get learnings and go forward. Yep. News On has been about existing today and get learnings. And so you're seeing a lot of that happen around live local news content. The other genre of live content where you didn't see it was sports. And Tennis Channel was one that moved into that space last year with a channel called T2. And T2, if you go, it's exclusive right now on Samsung TV Plus. I imagine some point early next year it won't be exclusive there anymore, and it will be distributed to other FAST platforms. It is not just like shoulder programming or small tournaments, right? It is part. If you watch Roland Garros this past year, you'd find courts that ran on Tennis Channel, you found courts that ran on T2, and then you found all the courts running on Tennis Channel Plus. And so in itself is a channel with graphics and an announcer and play-by-play, all the things one would expect from a sports network.
Right.
Whether or not sports moves more to that area in the same way tennis did remains to be seen. I think it sort of depends on the sport. But I do think that's an area where it's growing. I think just library channels of content that were playing in the AVOD world and then said, what if we get on a fast? That's some more revenue putting in there. I think some of them will stay and most of them won't.
And plus, how much value can you pull out of your SVOD library before the folks that are paying are saying, wait a minute here, I don't have access to that title, that series that I liked before it's gone. And so, yeah, there's a balance there. What do you think about the news of the BBC announcing that at some point they're going to merge their broadcasting, their streaming, one big kind of, streaming service, integrate all the different properties and brands into one? Is that where the industry's going? Are they getting way ahead of themselves, or are we going to be, like you mentioned the dot channel lineup, the benefit you have on viewer acquisition for your cables through digital rabbit ears, whatever, in different ways to acquire viewers and for them to discover content. At some point, does that all go away and it becomes, digital marketing basically, and one big sort of streaming service in the light of ATSC 3.0, for instance, at what point are you going to manage those different channels, apps, whatever, in very similar ways? That makes sense?
Yeah, it does. So the benefit of next-gen TV, which is not dissimilar to what the BBC has been talking about, because the BBC has been doing a version of next-gen TV for a while, right? It's just less robust in terms of the bandwidth. There, it's referred to. This is not the technical terms, referred to as the big red button, right? So on the remote controls, there's a red button. If you press that red button, it will unlock all this other video features that are coming through the airwaves on the BBC. Now it's not just the BBC; it's also all the other public, right? And for instance, if you were watching a sporting event, you press a big red button, and all of a sudden, all these different camera angles would come out. And you would be able to select through these camera angles. And that's not happening now. It's been happening for 7, 8, 9 years. Well, those different camera angles, these are just feeds. These are just, and that feed could take the form of video or data, right? And the question is, the interactivity could be as simple as just you clicking from the feeds. But if there's a thing that takes you back, now you have more interactivity, right? There's a return back through whatever the internet connection is. So the reality is that next gen TV is IP based, which is different than how broadcasting works today.
Right.
And so therefore, this giant, beautiful bandwidth that's the public airwaves, that's over the air TV, is a giant streaming pipe now. And it's now rolling out. And all you need to do is have an antenna or buy a TV set that has the antenna built in.
Built in, yep.
And so I think what's happening there is you start to think about the combination of the existing ecosystem of TV brands combined with data and streaming, and you start to see a lot of different experiences. Whether it ends up becoming one big giant brand and not specified by channel number or whatnot, I don't know. But I do think in one of the things that's unique to the US market, you've seen in other markets, is that local, what makes a city unique, I'm a New Yorker. I've lived in LA now for 37 years, but I'm a New Yorker. And I have a passion for New York. I'm very interested in all the things that happen in New York, and so on. Well, that passion for where you grew up or where you live, your hometown, your home neighborhood, your block, that is more powerful today than it has really ever been. And so if TV stations or radio stations or any other brand that's local, newspapers and so on, fail to reflect that, then yeah, you'll end up in a place where it's all just one national brand and so on. It's hard to imagine that. It's hard to imagine that people aren't going to remain fans of the local team, or they're going to care about things that happen in their community, or they'll be interested in different things. There are shows that perform better in the Pacific Northwest than they do in the Northeast, and in California, and music the same way. There are different music playlists and so on based on radio stations, or if you're streaming it. The geography and the uniqueness of a marketplace is quite clear.
Yeah.
And so I think that makes it hard to sort of imagine this one giant.
There's one big orb of cornucopia of content all mushed together. I get what you're saying there. I mean, in any industry, you have that classic collapse of the middle, right? Where the folks, the Netflixes of the world, where you get the scale, you can do a lot there. And then you have purpose content for particular communities of interest. You mentioned the tennis channel, but in the middle, it's difficult, right? Because you may not have the scale. You may not have the focused sort of audience. And maybe that's where the consolidation happens in the industry. We're almost out of time here, Adam, but just final thoughts on your predictions for next year. And then I have a question about you personally.
Well, my prediction for next year is, hang on, basically.
Okay.
Right. I think you're going into what appears to be a challenged market. And so there are businesses that are not ready for that, and you're seeing that happen now, adjustments being made. I also think you'll start to see a lot of people realize, certain business models aren't really working completely, and maybe you'll see some return back to, and this is not just because I'm in the business of delivering free TV channels, but I do see the rise of free.
Okay.
Whether it be the TV channels or whether it be FAST, that rise will absolutely continue because the viewer wants it, and the programming on those platforms is getting better and better, right? And advertisers are coming there, so therefore you have the economics to continue to invest in your programming. So,
we're sort of out of the segment where we talk shop, and this podcast is about not only what's happening in the industry, but the leaders in the industry. And we like to sort of personalize some of those executives like yourself. And maybe you can tell us something interesting about yourself, Adam, a hobby or an interest that, folks may not know about you.
Thank you. No one asks. As an adult, my biggest hobby as an adult, besides, and I have to say this, I think by law, besides loving my children and being very proud of them, but which by the way happens to be true, is I'm a street art fan. And so every weekend I will get on my bike because it's hard to find street art whizzing by in a car.
Mm-hmm.
And I will go ride through alleys of different neighborhoods of LA hunting for street art. And so
Wow.
if you see any of my social feeds, which there are 10 people apparently that do, I just post street art pretty much all the time.
There's a really cool neighborhood. I can't remember the name of it in Fort Lauderdale. I saw it. It's all like blocks of street art. Pretty impressive.
Fort Lauderdale and also Miami. There's a huge area in Miami now too with street art.
Maybe I'm thinking Miami. Maybe it is Miami.
I think it's Miami.
Yeah.
And that area is exploded in terms of the commissioned allowed work. There's also amazing street art. A lot of people wouldn't think this. In Salem, Massachusetts, there is a neighborhood called the
That's my neck of the woods. Wow. Didn't know.
All right. So go to Salem, go to the Punto neighborhood, which is on the other side of that little creek river that goes through there. And what that is it's an economic zone where they have put buildings, they have let street artists come in and completely paint murals across entire neighborhoods. And it's part of the Punto Urban, I think it's called the Punto Urban Art Museum, but it's not a museum. The museum is the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably one of the best collections of street art I've ever seen next to downtown Los Angeles. Like downtown LA is crazy with the amount of street art that pops up there. And but for me, I love the fact that street art is not permanent. Right.
Sort of. Yeah.
And well, some is permanent because it's commissioned. I like the kind that might not be there. So, and generally speaking, it's not in a museum, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's available to all.
It's wild. It's available. It's I get it.
And art in my mind is part of what lifts neighborhoods and also what brings neighborhoods together. And so that's another reason why I'm so passionate about street art and finding it.
Now, would we ever see you with a can of spray paint, walking down the street in LA or, or, here we go. So for our listeners, we have to describe what we're seeing here.
Well, you'll see me standing next to some street artists pretending that I'm a street artist. But what I do have in my office, right, is a limited edition spray can. This is Keith Haring, right? And it just happens to be spray painting and revolutionizing television. So this to me is the combination of my private passion, personal passion, and what also I do for a living. So there you go.
Very cool. Very awesome. Thank you so much for sharing some of the personal side of yourself, Adam. It's been a great conversation. Keep doing what you're doing and keep an eye on it. With all of the growth networks there. And thank you for spending time with us.
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed it. And I'm glad someone asked me about what my personal interests are.
Well, listen, it's been a pleasure. This is Brian Mahoney once again for OTT Executive Podcast. Signing off. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you.